So the name of this presentation, or I guess we'll call it a presentation, but I don't know if that's what this is. It's a reflection. Maps, doors, and museums. They're methodological notes on finding a way. And what I mean by this is I'm trying to think, I've been thinking a lot about museums these days, and I've been trying to write a book about Ebola, and I've had to think with exhibits about Ebola in West Africa in particular, and the myths and organizations tell about themselves vis-a-vis the pandemic that affected Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea. Those myths, as Dionne Brand writes, are seductive, but they need material power to enforce it. And in fact, that's how I'm reading these exhibits and their locations. In reading A Map to the Door of No Return, as I write, I've felt, I love the way she writes that it's an invitation to an open conversation, that writing is, where works find each other and live in the same world, even as they concern things that seem unrelated to or untethered from each other in practice. I think there's space for speculation here about what it means to belong, what it means to identify origins, and the kinds of lines being drawn around regions, around places of origins, the kinds of origin stories that emerge. If the door of no return is a place of empty beginnings, a creation place, a site of belonging or unbelonging, as Dionne writes, what is the museum? Is it the antidote, the antithesis to the door? Brand later muses in the book that museums are enclosures of and for the dead, but they are also, quote, wide vistas, dark alleyways, car rides across the backs of cities and bodies wrapped in cold coats. I read this to mean that the museum is perspective and light. It is embodied navigation, exposure. But I also read this as a call to think about the place of remembering and forgetting in terms of the practices of wayfinding, of finding a way, the way. Itineraries and destinations are kind of the point of the book, whether they are spiritual, physical, and administrative, as part of nation making and nation building, as a part of construction of belonging. So if the museum is perspective and light, who looks, who is looked at, what is looked at, who sees in what is seen, whose perspectives matter, upon what is light shown and what lingers in the darkness behind the scenes. Unlike the door of no return, it is not a place emptied of beginnings. It is in fact quite saturated with them. There are beginnings, and this is the beginning of the Ebola exhibit at the CDC Museum that ended a couple of years ago. It's the beginnings in the construction of narrative with images. Here's the security area at the beginning of that place. It's beginning in terms of the narrative with images, objects, and texts enclosed. Curation is a preoccupation not only with collection, but also with recollection as a mode of engaging and producing a museum's subjects, its objects. It is a place of modified conditional captivity, a domesticated space, never a wild space. So a few scenes from this research. I actually, rather than focusing on the CDC Museum, which I think I've done quite a bit, I'm interested in this other place that I'm still working through. And that is the Imperial War Museum. In, I want to say 2016, 2017, this exhibit went up in the Imperial War Museum in London. And so I reached out to the curator and I called him and I arranged a phone interview. And I wanted him to explain how Ebola and ISIS came to be the extremes to which the British military was responding. I never really quite got an answer, except that these two military interventions coincided with each other. The first, the Ebola epidemic happened, of course, or it started in late 2013, but it wasn't a part of the sort of international consciousness until, say, summer, June, July, August of 2014. And at this point, Doctors Without Borders was requesting aid from military aid for the treatment of Ebola in this area because the health system had become overwhelmed. And so this curator, who had a pot of money for contemporary warfare, contemporary military intervention, had two events to cope with, to deal with, to address in the production of organizational or institutional memory. One was the intervention by the British military in Ebola areas, but specifically Sierra Leone, the former colony, and to ISIS, to address the expansion of Daesh or ISIS into Afghanistan, Syria. And so one of the things that happened was these two things are happening at the same time. It began with sort of humanitarian relief to assist the Yazidi ethnic group, and then it became something else. So one is about very close, intimate contact. One is about sort of removed airdrops and drone warfare. Why this is important, I think, will come up later. So he never really quite explained. So besides that coincidence in time, it wasn't clear what constituted the extremes of military intervention. But I think this was supposed to encapsulate that for us, for the viewer, for the subject, for the audience of this museum. So man and power is split diagonally, raising questions to me about the extent to which the line between the two is necessarily blurred. Extremes are actually part of a continuum, right? That usually means that there's something uniting them, in addition to keeping them far apart from each other. As you can see, the color scheme is supposed to map onto the extreme, which is to say they're the opposite of each other on the color wheel, which is what my daughter told me. So a year or so later, I wanted to visit the Imperial War Museum, amongst other museums, with my daughter. And we decided, even though the exhibit was long gone, I wanted to get a sense and feel of the sight and the smell of this place, the whole, what it feels like to be in the room where that exhibit existed. So a little bit of history about the Imperial War Museum. It was it opened in the interwar period. It was founded in 1917. It was supposed to be known as the National War Museum, but its name was changed to the Imperial War Museum so that, quote, India and the Dominions would feel that their part in the war would be permanently commemorated in the center of empire. And so I find myself with my daughter here because I'm trying to kind of get a sense of the place. And when I arrived at the museum in March 2019, the Ebola ISIS exhibit was long gone, but another small exhibit had taken its place. I walked into the space towards a help desk cashier. And so this is what the museum looks like. And I walked in with my daughter and I asked the woman at the help desk where the ISIS and Ebola exhibit had gone, or where it had been. And this woman looked at me like she seemed really suspicious, even though I was there with this 7-year-old. And she stumbled over an answer and she said, well, it's not there now. And I said, I know. And I name checked the curator. I wanted her to know that I knew him. And I remember pausing as I said the name to see if it registered for her, to see whether an association with a name might dissolve her skepticism. He's not here today, she answered. Well, I'm writing about the exhibit and I wanted to get a sense of the space, I told her, even if the exhibit is no longer there. We changed the space, she tells me. There are different configurations for each new exhibit. I'm not sure how helpful it will be. I understand, but could you show me where it was anyway? She pointed, it's over there. I entered the space briefly, and I'm not even sure what I saw. Like, I can't remember. My notes and my stash of photographs do not appear to show a trace of the exhibit space where the fighting extremes had been. And I wonder why that is. But this encounter with the cashier, with the help desk person, remained etched in my memory in my field notes. Does the War Museum as a space engender suspicion, skepticism, or is it just museums? Later, as I'm talking to a friend about these notes, about this encounter, he tells me maybe the problem was that I had broken down the imagined wall between what can be viewed by the public and what goes on behind the scenes to make an exhibit work. She was not ready, I think he was trying to say, to let down the curtain, to let us see what was behind, that there was actually labor and work involved in bringing this exhibit to the space. Now, what I did end up finding, this was sort of the culmination of all of this searching, this looking, this going around the museum with my daughter, was this featured piece called Mimesis, African Soldier. And if you can read here, it was installed by the visual artist John Akromfa, who delved into the Imperial archives to highlight the role of colonial subjects on the continent in the world wars. His aim, I think, was really focused on recuperating the voices and actions of Africans who served on the side of empire. But it brought me back in that circle to Dionne Brand's work, which is to talk about this idea of inclusion, the apotheosis of this mimetic process that Akromfa seems to be trying to push forth in this narrative of the African soldier whose involvement in imperial wars needed to be recognized, needed to be put in this space. So as part of this idea of home, of nation and belonging, and empire being at its seat. So, which brings me back to these earlier concerns. How am I to understand the space of the museum? This founding idea of the myths, the seduction of the myth, the material power to enforce it. Who sees and what is seen, whose perspective matters? If the museum is perspective and light, if it is embodied navigation, exposure, what is exposed? What is one supposed to feel? How is one supposed to belong upon entering the space of the museum, upon entering the conditions of object captivity?